I think we'll crack on for the simple reason that I'm hoping at the end to show you some UFO clips. And there will be a couple of clips coming up very shortly of a cylindrical object in broad daylight and mobile phone, good quality, very interesting movement of the object. Thank you. Right, we're officially back, we're on. Welcome back. Right, Alan Godfrey case. I think it was only the Exopolitik group members that were aware of this case. I did say it was an important case, and it is certainly in British history because it's referred to as Britain's first abduction case. Now, whatever you think about the abduction phenomenon, i.e. alleged alien abduction, many people will run a mile at the thought of alien abduction and the subject of it, because it's a bit distasteful. Is it real? Sadly it is, because I've talked to a lot of people who are serious researchers. I've also talked to a doctor called Roger Lear, who's a foot surgeon, who has the strange hobby, for want of a word, over and above his work, of removing what he considers alien implants from people's bodies, who claim to have been abducted at various times in their life. And what I would have to say is that there's quite a lot of interesting evidence that says that these are real objects, some kind of tracking objects. They tend to all be the size of a pea. When you take them out, there's no sign of entry, there's no infection, which is odd. And when you take them off, you can't cut them. The outer membrane, there's an outer membrane that you can't cut with a scalpel. They have to be taken off very carefully. And inside, there's an oil that's strange. It's been identified, but it's terrestrial, but never seen in the compounds that it's found in, inside this object. All the elements, there's metals inside that are all pressed together, and they're not found naturally occurring. They're all known metals, so there's nothing new, but they're compressed in a way that we are not aware of in terms of production. They react to magnets in a strange way. Sometimes some little antennas come out that have been seen, all on video. And that's a guy called Roger Lear. Right. The reason why I mention abductions is because this is an abduction case. It's a case that I researched for 18 months. And the reason why I researched it for 18 months is that I live in the county of West Yorkshire, and he lives in the county of West Yorkshire, so it seemed, when I started the database, it'd be pretty silly for me not to go to this famous guy who's had this sighting. But basically, this is a very reluctant officer in terms of he's a no-nonsense, you know, you can't mess him around. He doesn't suffer fools gladly. He's a straight-up guy, well-respected at the time. And basically, he is driving his police car on his own, and he's just about to turn right onto a housing estate when suddenly something catches the corner of his eye. It's 5:10 in the morning. There's no traffic on this road that he's on. Something catches his eye and he thinks a bus has skidded up the road. It's just like the corner of his eye. So he cancels his indicator, he doesn't turn right, he goes straight on. Within seconds, he suddenly realizes that he's looking at this. He said, that is blocking the road. It's 5 feet off the ground, perhaps 1 to 2 meters off the ground. He says the bottom half is rotating anti-clockwise. The top half appears to have some kind of darkened windows. Doesn't see anything inside. Because it's November, there are trees nearby, and because of the centrifugal force of the rotating object, leaves are gathering in a circle beneath the object that was just hovering in silence. And he will often say that it was so real that if he had a brick, it would have gone bang if he'd have thrown it at it. Because he got within the back of this room, 30 feet. So he drove to within where I am now to the guy at the back of the room. That's close. No noise. 20 feet, as he describes, by 14 feet. So literally 4 meters by 3 meters. object blocking the road, low to the ground. Initially, he goes for his main radio, his personal radio, it's dead. He then goes for the vehicle radio, it's dead. He then has a clipboard next to him with some writing material, which he can sketch the drawing, and he sketches that drawing. He then decides to get out the vehicle and approach the object. As he approaches the object, he suddenly thinks, this is not a good idea. And he starts to walk back to the police car. He's just about to get into the police car when the next thing he remembers, he's driving down the road. Suddenly there's like a jump in time. He's suddenly in the police car. He's suddenly driving 100 yards further up the road. Object's gone and he's good. Where's it gone? Spins the car around, goes back and finds a circular patch of leaves where the object had been. And because it had been raining during the night, it was noticeably drier underneath where the object had been. He drives to the police station, which is about a half mile away. He sees an officer, one of his colleagues, a guy called PC Malcolm Agley. He says, Malcolm, get in the car. You're never going to believe this. I've just seen a flying saucer. Get away, get away. No, seriously, I have. Get in the car. He drives him back, and that officer, who I've spoken to, Malcolm Agley, corroborates the fact that there was the circular patch. The craft had gone, the object had gone, but there was this noticeably drier patch where he said the object had been, and that kind of corroborates what Alan was saying, that something was there and hovering. The interesting thing about this is when this happens, there are a number of things that happens that because of time I can't really go into. I could spend a good couple of hours on this case alone, but literally, cutting a long story short, what happens is his colleague says to him, we best be getting off now. It's late, it's 6:10. He goes, what do you mean it's 6:10? He says, I've already just come out, it must be 5:20. No, he says, it's 6:10. We'll shift change at 6 o'clock. And he's thinking, what? For him, he has lost some time. He can't understand it, he doesn't think of it as missing time, but he's just, it's odd. And what he also finds is in his boots, his police boot, he had a split in a new pair of boots that he went out in that night, and there was a big split under his foot, about 2 inches in length, that he doesn't know how he got the split. And when he took his sock off, when he got home, there was a red mark that size under where the split had been in his boot, and it was itching, and he didn't know why. He went to the doctor, gave him some cream, and after about a week, it went away. Didn't really think too much about it. But he was puzzled about this time distortion. For him, it was 5:20 at the latest, but in reality, it was 6:10, and he was like missing 30 or 40 minutes. He wasn't going to do anything about this at all. A week later, he released the story in the local media, in the paper. And he got a bit of ribbing from people that knew him in the village, kind of thing. But it all kind of died down. About a month later, a UFO researcher called Harry Harris, who was quite well known in the late 80s, early 90s, went to see him, funnily enough, with a Chief Inspector police officer who had our sighting as well, a guy called Chief Inspector Collinson. And they went to see him and they said, look, Alan, is there anything odd about your experience? And he said, the only thing that was odd is that I couldn't understand why it was 6:10. I thought it was only 5:30. So cutting a long story short, Harry Harris, who was a solicitor, he had his own business, private practice, said, look, I know a couple of professors at Manchester University, and he didn't live too far away from Manchester University. Would you allow me to pay for you to be hypnotised, just to see if we can retrieve any memories, any hidden memories? And he went, nope, not interested. So again, if this guy is trying to make famous or look for notoriety, he wouldn't have said that. So they went away, disappointed. They went back to him about a month later and said, look, hopefully you might have reconsidered. And because he'd had some kind of nightmares, he was a bit confused. He said, okay then, didn't know what to expect. They went to see a guy called Professor Jaffe at Manchester University, who was not told it was anything to do with UFOs. It was basically a clear brief, nothing mentioned about UFOs, just investigate this officer's mind. He seems to have some blocked memories. Can you put him under hypnosis and see what comes out? On the first session, they clipped him up to heart monitors and devices to monitor his blood pressure and things like that. It wasn't recorded the first session. When they do the first session, they're going through it, he gets hypnotized, and then this story emerges. When he went back to the police car, and just before he had that jump, when he's suddenly down the road and the object's gone, what comes out under hypnosis is that when he goes back to the police car, because he's a bit frightened, he's changed his mind about going too close, he goes back, he's just about to get in the police car, he's engulfed by a really intense bright white light, and he then finds himself on some kind of bed in a room with small creatures 3 to 4 feet high, put in some kind of machinery on his legs. Now, this is before the X-Files. This is really before Communion, the book Communion by Whitley Strieber and the iconic alien grey head people may think about. This kind of predates that. And basically, small creatures are putting stuff on his legs. Doesn't know where he is. He describes those objects not as what may be referred to as greys now, with the big bug eyes, etc., the kind of the mythology that's now in UFO. He describes them in his own terms as lamp heads, bulb heads. But actually, in his own words, and it predates it, it's not a bad description of what we now refer to as the alien grey. Okay, which kind of sounds like science fiction. This is under hypnosis. Is it evidence? No. It's anecdotal information. But it's interesting. And basically what happens is he then sees a humanoid figure with a beard and a skull cap of some description and a gown that talks to him telepathically, because he says he's not moving his lips, and kind of tells him that he's going to be okay. At that point there, the professor starts asking him a question about the equipment on his legs. Okay? Describe what these creatures, these things are doing to your legs. What machinery, describe the machinery. And at that point there, as if there is some kind of rejection element built into his response, his heart monitor starts racing, his blood pressure starts going up, and he becomes really distressed. So much so that the professor goes, whoa, I'm going to stop this because it's getting a bit dangerous. So they end the session then. They end the session then, and the professor is absolutely astounded. He's never heard anything. He didn't know. He's not interested in UFOs. Never heard anything like it in his life. Other than a couple of cases in America, the most famous case being the Barney and Betty Hill case in 1961, which is an early abduction case, and the Anthony Villalobos case in South America in 1957. Abductions was, other than sort of the Adamski type contactee element, which is, some people believe is real, other people don't. Personally, I am not sure either way. But basically, it was fairly rare, the abduction scenario in 1980, and certainly in Britain. So basically, the professor goes, this is weird. I've never heard anything like this before. I don't want to tell Alan what came out of that interview. I want to try to repeat the experiment. And that's what scientists do, isn't it? They try to get evidence and repeat the experiment. So what he says, I'm going to ask him if he'll go to another professor, which is called Professor Jaffe. Professor Blair was the first one, Professor Jaffe was the second one. 3 months later, he goes in. This time it's all on video. He's all hooked up. Exactly the same story occurs. And again, the professor is not given any kind of UFO brief. He basically says, I'm referring this case to you. Will you examine him and try to put him under hypnosis and see if you can retrieve any memories? Okay? Same story comes out. When questions about the equipment, anything of detail, he starts to have an adverse reaction. The whole hypnosis session lasts about 45 minutes. Cutting a long story short, 3 months later he then goes back to the first professor, same story on video. 3 months later, so this is a year down the line, he's had 4 sessions, 3 months apart, the last 3 all of on video, same story, back to Professor Jaffrey. Exactly the same, no inconsistencies. Is it evidence? No, it's anecdotal information about something that may have happened. But what we know now, after 30 years of abduction research, is that there are actually quite a lot of elements there. How many times, if anybody's actually read about abductions, do people find themselves in a room being examined by small creatures who are like the workers, that are often described as 3 feet high with big heads, big black eyes, very spindly bodies, all kind of close encounters kind of thing. But that scenario is regular, and it happens all over the world. Abduction scenarios actually happen in third world countries where they don't have TV, where they don't have radio, where they don't even have any kind of interaction with what we would consider books, magazines, to create the story. And they come out with the same stories. So it kind of lends weight that it happens to all over and is a real phenomenon. He basically wished that this never happened to him. For the simple reason is that a year afterwards, and because he had done sessions on hypnosis on video, a journalist with the Daily Mirror, which was a big national newspaper in England, published a story about Alan Godfrey and got some clips from the video. And it basically went worldwide. And then what happened to him then was that the police force that he was with, West Yorkshire Police, kind of like ostracised him and made his life very difficult. He was told that he was being transferred to another police station for career development, yet his colleagues were told he was being moved because he was stealing uniform. He was never arrested, never interviewed. He was taken for psychiatric evaluation under the guise of a medical, once-a-year medical. They really put him through the mill. He was hounded, and eventually after 5 years, he retired on ill health. But right up until his retirement, life was very difficult for him. The police force really turned his attention. It drove him to the brink of suicide. He went up onto the moors with a shotgun and he was going to kill himself because he was ridiculed and he was in the glare of publicity all the time. His family and his children were taunted in the street. So that's a real human interest story. That's the real story of Alan Godfrey, what happens to him afterwards and the way the media nearly broke him. Great story. Wrote a screenplay. Right. So when we now look back at abductions, it often invariably involves what's called missing time. A period, 10, 15, 20 minutes of missing time. Don't be ever confused that you've got to be in your bed and asleep. So people will say, oh, it's just sleep paralysis, things like that. People can be driving the cars. Multiple people can be abducted driving the cars. People can be stood by a bus stop and be abducted. Some people don't. Some people have recollections without ever need to have an hypnosis session. Often there are cases where there are multiple people, multiple abductions who all remember the same thing. So it's not just in bed making it all up. We also know that what happened to him in terms of some of the physical effects, the mark, the boot. A lot of people who were abducted claim to have had some kind of physical examination. Often there will be a group of dots, like pinpricks in patterns on hands or around the body. Often there are what's called scoop marks, little marks, deviations in the body that weren't there before. Little things like that. And don't forget, he had a split boot and he had a mark under his foot that he couldn't explain. Might be nothing, but when we look back in the context of what we've learned 30 years later, he kind of followed a lot of similar patterns. That he had some kind of physical mark on his body. And don't forget, they were messing with his legs and putting something on his legs. So who knows? It's a very famous case because it's Britain's first abduction case. This is a good case. that has come to me recently. Basically, what's good about this is this guy was a village policeman up in the mountains in Wales, in a little village, and they look over next to a lake, and in the distance there is a big nuclear power station generating electricity for the area. They see that object. He and his wife's not a police officer, but she sees the same. And then that object moves over to that big, it's a bit faint, but you can just see a white building in the photograph in the distance. That's a big, huge nuclear power station. Now, it's now doesn't operate, but it was then. And it stays hovering over that nuclear power station for several minutes. If anybody knows their UFO history, there is a big interaction between UFOs and nuclear weapons and nuclear power. They are interested in power and our development of nuclear power. Many, many sightings from the 40s onwards. Big correlation between UFOs being seen above nuclear power plants, nuclear facilities, militarily. And if you even think back to the famous Roswell case in 1947, is it a coincidence that that was the first atomic bomber group anywhere in the world, that they suddenly turn up? I think not. They are monitoring what we're doing. This is an interesting case. We talked about green spheres and green glows. Well, this officer, he's still quite traumatized about this, but he did speak to me, and that's him on the left. And interestingly, the other officer that was with him, he wouldn't go to the lecture that I did there a few years ago. He basically is so upset by the event that he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't say it doesn't happen, but he says, I don't want to talk about it. Okay, but they're driving along a two-lane road. So in England, we would say a dual carriageway, 2 lanes on either side of a central reservation. No traffic, they go in to work onto a night shift, when suddenly what pulls alongside of them is a green sphere the size of a car. No noise, whoa, that then overtakes and then shoots off over a farmer's field. Weird, eh? And no wonder some people don't want to talk about it. That guy is still traumatized by it. Indirectly, I've spoken to many officers who have never even told their wives, partners, about some of their experiences. They've told maybe the colleague that was with them, they've talked about it, but they are so frightened of ridicule that they don't come forward. So when they find out about me, they ring me up, and it's almost like a cathartic experience where they're almost in tears. I wanted to tell somebody about this for so long. I'm not crazy, I'm not crazy. I said, no, you're not crazy. I am. But this is another case. This is a good case. Recent case, 1984, Metropolitan Police officer, early hours, on patrol, 2 uniforms, on mobile. They see a large triangular object. Since the early 80s, there's been a proliferation in triangular-shaped objects. And we'll talk about stealth later. All right? This is an object triangular in shape, 3 times the size of a football field. 3 times. And where they see it is actually over football fields. So that's how he guesses its size. They're looking across at some football fields when this object, and at one point it goes above their police car and it blacks the sky out. It is that big. It's low to the ground. 3 times the size of a football field. 7 to 8 minutes duration. That's a long time, isn't it? If I was to speak silently now and just 8 minutes would seem like a lifetime. It's a long time. So that's a good sighting. He reported it over the air. I'm looking at a weird object. When he came back, do you want to make an official police report? No, we'll leave it. Because they don't want to get tired as being some kind of UFO nut. That's the perception. This guy, traffic car, he and another officer are parked up on a motorway. You know, like motorways, watch for people speeding. He's parked up. when suddenly a missile-shaped object, I think 9 meters, just flies low next to them, parallel with the road. Can you imagine? You sat there, minding your own business, talking to your colleague, and then suddenly a 9-meter missile, low to the ground, just goes past you. No noise, windows down. We cannot do that. Stealth cannot do that. Why would stealth fly along motorways? Are there any missile stealth? No. This is a good one because it's radar confirmed. People say, oh, there's no evidence of UFOs. There's no such thing as evidence. It's all rubbish. Manchester Airport pick up an unidentified, uncorrelated target that is stationary on their radar. They inform the police, the local police at Kidlington. Can you send 2 officers out to a high vantage point because we have a stationary object that's on our radar, we can't explain it, can somebody go check it out? 2 officers go out there, no doubt thinking this is a load of rubbish, but they get there and they see an object in the position where it's supposed to be, from a high vantage point, and it's shining beams down to the ground, multicolours, for 2 hours. Not 2 minutes, not 2 seconds, 2 hours. Now, you would have thought that somebody would rang the television people and say, get your ass down there at 2 hours. But they don't. But the superintendent in charge of those officers says, no, this is a real story. This is a real event. My officers, I will corroborate what they say. They're good officers. And he's backing them up. It's pretty impressive. Radar. This, in terms of Britain, is one of Britain's most famous UFO nights because literally over 6 counties of England, UFOs are seen by multiple police officers and members of the public, but interestingly by police officers all over the place, as the object, 2 objects are seen flying parallel with each other in silence, low to the ground, about 1,000 feet off the ground. 2 bright lights as it makes its way over 6 counties, 6 regions of England. Now the number is up to 24 different police officers from different police forces, different locations geographically, witnessing this. Very important sighting. And there's a guy in England who was at the UFO desk called Nick Pope. He was at the UFO desk between 91 and 94. It's one of the few decent things that he did, but he did a study of this case and he actually kind of got the MOD to admit that an unknown object or unknown objects were operating in Britain's airspace, not on radar. However, that sighting was deemed as not of defence significance, which is kind of a bit weird, really. There's an unknown object flying above your skies. People are seeing it left, right and centre, but it's of no significance. I'll tell you why I think it's of no significance later on. This is an interesting case because I would think most people in England, here in Denmark, will have heard of the famous monument of Stonehenge. You know, the famous old monument. This officer, along with 11 other officers, was guarding the Stonehenge monument for the summer solstice. Yeah, the longest day of the year. And basically, they witness an object that does this. Right angle. Right angle. Silently across from one side of the horizon to the other. 12 officers see that. So it's all corroborated, making right angle turns. A bit like a castle wall. We can't do that. Nobody can do that. Good sighting. This is an interesting one. In 1999, there used to be, I'm sure you're aware, the IRA, troubles between, in Ireland, lots of bombs going off. It lasted about 30 years. Fortunately, that's all stopped. But this officer was an RUC officer, Royal Ulster Constabulary, and even when they were off duty during those troubled years that lasted about 30 years, all Royal Ulster Constabulary police officers carried a sidearm pistol because a lot of officers were unfortunately shot and killed. So they had a sidearm. And they come across He and his wife come across this object hovering above the road. He tells his wife, stay in the car. He gets out and he walks directly underneath. And he's got his hand like that. And he's thinking, what am I going to do with this? And it's just hovering there in total silence. Huge object. 100 metres above the road. 300 feet. That's really low in a rural location. Object suddenly gone. This is interesting because a police helicopter and officers on the ground see a strange light. They report it. The helicopter sees this light as well. That's what's called a loose minute. It's under the Freedom of Information Act. It's a document that comes out. It's written between a civil servant, somebody who works for the government, to another civil servant. It's called a loose minute. About a credible witness, i.e. police, sighting, 3rd of November. It's actually 2003. It's not 1999 for some reason. Basically, what happens is the sighting occurs on the 17th of November, and it's reported as a credible witness. You've got a confirmation by officers on the ground, and you've got confirmation from a helicopter crew. They also make checks with a couple of radar stations at Swanwick and RAF Neatishead. It's not on radar, but we're looking at something. It's not on radar. The next day, just the 18th, one day later, somebody's saying, doesn't matter that the police saw it, doesn't matter that it's not on radar, it's of no defence significance. How can they make a decision like that? If something is strange flying above your airspace, is that not of defence significance? Especially when we live in a world of terrorism, as we do. If something is flying above a nuclear facility and stopped and hovered, is that not of defence significance? I beg to differ that it would be. But that's what governments will say. That's what the British government will say. This is a traffic clip to show you. This is a video clip of an actual UFO. This is a traffic car, and a lot of traffic cars have front-facing video cameras looking out through the windscreen. Don't be confused by the red light in the middle of the screen. That's just the red recording button. What you're looking for is, as the object is driving along, it will go around a bend of the road, and on the right-hand side, suddenly you will see a bright light on the horizon. It's not the sharpest copy, but what the officer said he saw was 12 spheres, white in colour, all clustered together above a hill. But let's just run the clip. Because you can see actually the officers driving along. That's the recording light in the centre, and the road is going to bend round to the right. If you're watching the speed there, he's doing 48 miles an hour. 49, he's going round a bend. Watch for a hill now. He says he sees, with better vision, obviously he was there, 12 spheres clustered together above the hillside. Watch his speed start to come down. What the hell is that? This is daylight. And he's slowing. And he watches it. And strangely, what happens is the object in broad daylight begins to blink out. It's there. It's not. It's there. It's not. It's there. And then it goes. And then he starts speeding up. He sees 12 white spheres. It's just an interesting clip. Oh, there we go. This is an interesting one again. Okay. This is a new case that's come to me. This is in Scotland, up in the hills. This is a black triangle UFO. This is the actual location. I've said to the officer, go back. He's a serving officer. Can you go back, take a photograph of the place where it happened? This is his photograph. So imagine over the hillside. There is no noise, 50-metre altitude, a black triangle in that photograph. And that's what he saw. Interesting with that one is he said that there was a kind of an interference. He started to develop a headache when the object is there. When the object goes away, the pain in his head goes. That's not very often heard. This is a really good case. It's got 2 video clips with it of a cylindrical object. I mentioned it earlier. It's telephone footage. It's good footage. It's clear. It's daylight. This object was seen to tumble for 30 minutes across the sky at a few thousand feet, maybe 5,000 feet. And so it's tumbling and tumbling. At one point, you will see in the first clip that the cylinder, which they describe as 90 to 150 meters in length, pretty big, is rotating on its own axis. It's in sunlight. You can see at one point the sun glinting off it, and as it's turning, the light goes off it. So let's go next on. This is the first clip. And here we go. Watch the light fade off it. Upright. No obvious means of propulsion. Staying in the air. Okay? Broad daylight. Let's go to the next clip. And play this clip. Watch now how this object is manoeuvring in the sky in this tumbling fashion. Captures part of that manoeuvre. 30 minutes going across the sky. What stays in the sky for 30 minutes? It's not the wind, it's not a balloon, it's dimensions. If anywhere near right, 90 to 150 meters in length. Rarely do we get better footage than that of a cylindrical object. That's a photograph that he took. Not only did he get 2 mobile phone clips, he took some stills on his mobile phone. And as we can see, maybe if we put the lights down again, sorry Peter, there's 2 or 3 slides, because there's some enhancements. He noticed that there appeared to be a light at one end, or what he thought was a light. Now, if you look at this, this is one of his actual photographs. It's not being retouched or anything like that, but you can see it's a long, cylindrical, dark object. That's a blow-up of that object, and it has some kind of protrusion at the end, but you could either argue that that's a light or it's a sunlight glinting off perhaps a metallic object at the top. Okay? But clearly an object in the sky. If it was a balloon, it would just be wind-borne. Objects, it's been analysed. Objects cannot tumble in a logical manner. Things don't tumble. If it's a balloon, it will go. It doesn't work like that. Huge dimensions. Okay, Pierre, if you want to put the lights back on. Okay, this is another case that's come in, and this is the most recent case, 29th of September. That ain't long ago, is it? And basically, this officer's got about 30 years service. He's retired, and he's come back as what's called a police support officer. But he's still in uniform. This is a daylight sighting. It's a corroborated sighting. And what's important about this one is, for the first time, I have had some official confirmation by the police for my work. Cutting a long story short, time is short, and I want to show you a couple of video clips. But basically, after 7 years of research, I never had any interference. And then now I do have interference, and I was disciplined and got a 12-month written warning purely because when the MOD closed its UFO desk, suddenly, in December 2009, they basically said, we're not taking any more UFO reports from the police or the public. So I then saw it as an opportunity to write to all the police forces in England and Wales and say, look, would you then send your reports that you're still going to get, because you get around 300 to 600 a year, would you send them to me and I'll research them in a private capacity? Oh, and by the way, I'm a police officer and I belong to this police force. And I've done that for credibility and said, look, I have a website, unofficial, for police officers. 3 of those forces have adopted me as a single point of contact officially, so they will do that. But because my chief constable got ribbed, had the mickey taken out of him by another chief constable, he thought I was bringing my force into disrepute, and I therefore had to go to a misconduct hearing and got a 12-month written warning, which is not good. Fortunately, that's expired, so I'm okay, but I have to now be a little bit more careful, all right? But the interesting thing about this site, the most recent sighting, is the fact that that's his drawing. It's not a great picture, but if you look where he's wrote UFO on the right, that's a cloud, and he saw it coming in out of the cloud, and it seemed to be watching 2 passing aircraft. But this is why it's interesting, because single point of contact, he sent me the police incident log. I don't usually get those. Every incident, even if it's a cat stuck up in a tree, creates an incident log, a number 421 of today's date. And everything that the police do in terms of their actions, which officers are deployed to that scene, are all written down. And he sent me it. And the 2 forces that had adopted me already are Humberside and Suffolk. This officer was the 3rd one. He's from Cheshire, and I didn't know this because they've not told me. And he sent me the log. That's a copy of the front page of the log. That's how all police logs in Britain start. They're all using the same kind of software. They all look like that. An incident on the top left-hand corner, 386 of the date, 27th, the time it comes in and it's opened. Then everything else, there can be many pages. It was a murder, it'd be a whole book. But what's more interesting is the next page. Because at the top it says, report from a police officer, him, create a command and control incident. Action taken will be based on the information relayed to the officer. Inform the officer they can report the sighting to DC, Gary Heseltine, at my website. That's nice, isn't it? Right? DC Heseltine collates and investigates sightings of UFOs witnessed by serving police officers. So that's really good. I've now got some police forces officially recognising me as the person to send their police sightings to. So for me, that's a great breakthrough. It's official recognition, and it's the first time in print that I'd seen it. The other 2 forces rang me up and said, we'll send you reports. So I wrote it down, but it's not the same as having a document that you can hold up to people and say, there's the evidence, okay? I told you about, this is a case that got away. Basically, UFOs historically are linked, or what falls under the UFO umbrella is also crop circles. A lot of this, you in the room will go, what a lot of rubbish. But believe me, it is under the UFO umbrella. 95%, maybe 98% of all crop circles are man-made, without a doubt. There are a lot of crop circle makers. However, this has been going on for a few hundred years, and there are historical records about objects that are big patterns in the cornfields. So it certainly wasn't done then. What you have is, in real crop circles, some researchers that I've met, I don't research them, but I've met experts who do, that those that are on the inside of a genuine one, the knuckles of the corn are blown out from the inside as if it's been microwaved. Okay, there's the heat source applied inside the circle. And similarly, soil samples from inside to outside are different. The soil samples inside appear to be irradiated with some heat, like a microwave, and the soil samples outside allow moisture in if they get wet. The soil samples inside, they don't. They seem to be resistant because they've been dried out. So they are under the UFO umbrella. The thing is, what would be nice is if we could get a real police officer to see a crop circle being made. Because that would be really good. And this guy, this police officer, rang me up and he said, I've got a case for you. He's brilliant. My sergeant's told me that he's seen 2 UFOs that made a crop circle. Whoa, this could be an important case. Get his number. He won't talk to you. He's just quiet. He didn't want to talk about it. But he's told me, and this guy is as straight as a die. He would never lie. I believe him. Right, try to go back to him, try to get him to speak to me. In the end, he wouldn't. But basically the story emerged that he, the sergeant, and was in uniform with a female officer in uniform. They were driving in Wales on a high valley road when suddenly they see 2 lights that are dancing in the sky, and it's just as sun up, dusk, dawn is about to break. So the sun's just about to come up, and they see these 2 lights making weird and wonderful patterns in the sky, and then suddenly they shoot off at speed. They drive to the edge of the hill and stop, get out, and below where they were was a new crop circle that hadn't been there. They'd been out on patrol earlier, hadn't seen it. They knew the area, and then they're driving, they look down, and there's a crop circle. That would have been a good story, wouldn't it? to have a first-hand officer go on the record, but he won't. So it's a second officer hearsay account. So that's all it is. It's a hearsay account. I mentioned at the start, I do an annual report. So this is the latest report. 52 on-duty cases involving 85 officers. Off-duty cases 16 involving 18, because sometimes man and wife, or friends together when they see something off-duty. Altogether, 68 new cases in the 9th report involving 103 police officers collectively. When you add that to the total figures from last year, we now have 425 cases between 1901, 2011, you've just seen the most recent one, involving 903 British police officers. Conclusions? I don't like police statistics. I don't like any statistics, really, because all statistics can be manipulated to say anything they want. However, what's interesting in this is, of the 425 cases, 73% of the cases are multiple police officer corroborated cases. So it's not what the skeptic would say, it's the officer who's tired and confused, he's on his own. These are multiple police officer sightings, over 300 cases. So they are witnessing, over many years, real phenomena, and objects that are not moving in a conventional manner, as has been described. Whilst I can't say that they're all ET, many aren't. Many probably will have mundane explanations. On many of the ones where we have the close proximity sighting, where it's right in front of you, where we have dynamic movement, where we have radar confirmations, a large proportion of those cases on the database point towards what I would consider an extraterrestrial explanation. I think I've only scratched the tip of an iceberg. And I am absolutely certain, and I know that there is some talk that we're going to try to speak to a group of 300 Danish police officers, that if we did that, afterwards, I've given a lecture, because they've had nobody to speak to, never have. I'd be very surprised if some Danish police officers didn't say, can I have a word? Afterwards, or by email. Because this isn't unique. If you go to America, all over the world, there are police officers seeing UFOs. In America, there would probably be hundreds that I can remember already, some fantastic cases. The future, what does it hold for me? In about 18 months, I'm going to retire. It's a bit uncomfortable now for me in the police doing my work. I know that they look at my website, that's why I don't update it much, because I know that they do. It's a bit uncomfortable. So I want to write a book next year about the police officer cases, because there's never been a book on UFOs anywhere in the world and police officers. So hopefully that will come out in 2013 as I plan to retire. I then will devote my time full-time, because I won't have murders, manslaughters and rapes to deal with. Okay? I think somebody in the audience is going to ask me about Rendlesham Forest, which is a very famous British case, arguably the second most famous case in the world, which I think there's going to be a question in the Q&A in a few minutes. Basically, I've written a film script with that, with a guy called Colonel Charles Holt. He was the guy most directly involved, and he was the deputy base commander of a nuclear facility, where multiple UFOs over 3 successive nights came to visit the base, or very near to it, just outside, for 3 successive nights over the Christmas period in 1980. It's a very famous case. All right? That's my lecture over with, but don't clap yet, if you were going to clap. Because there's a couple of little things I want to add. I said I'd show you some clips of UFOs. Do you want to see them? Can I show them? Okay, here we go. So let's get out of there. Now these are daylight sequences. A lot of skeptics will say there's no such thing as a good sequence. Now hopefully this will play first. It's a little montage. It lasts about 5 minutes of daylight sightings. In fact, I'm going to open with, let's play VLC. Okay, that's not good. Let's open a second sequence.
Try and use the media player.
The media player is not good. Right, so hang on. They were playing earlier. We have granddads. Come on. Come on. Might just want to turn the music down a little bit on this because it's done to music. This is a little sequence I put together. If you like the music, it's by Hans Zimmer, Last Samurai. Flying earring, rotating on its axis. Watch the lights. Watch for the object below the writing. There's a stationary object, bright white light. And is this not showing intelligence? The object below it is fixed, is above fixed. The object below it is coming up. Watch the cloud. And then it's going to go to the right. Two objects. It's going to go to the right. And then they're going to start moving off to the right. Nice little pair of lights. As you do. Fleet footage, multiple UFOs, lights in the sky. Notice the objects in clusters moving around. No definition, but lights moving, making patterns in the sky. This was analysed over 1,000 hours by the military, who concluded this is not birds, this is not balloons. Looks very similar, doesn't it? 50 years on. Watch for the object in the middle at the top there, just going to speed up and go through the gap. I said you should turn it down a bit.
Turn down the music. We can't hear what you're saying, and people are holding it.
It's too late. apologise for the loud noise there, but they've turned it up to the maximum for the other clips. If you've still got hearing, if you've still got hearing, which you may well not have, I apologise for that. But I think that's quite a good little sequence, and we should be told more about what's gone on in the media. Let's see if we can get this to play again. I'll see if it will play in Windows Media. There is no loud noise with this one, so I don't like that. Let's see if it will play in Real Mirror. Just thinking about it. Just thinking about it. It's not going to play it. Oh, here we go. It's the same object that you saw before. That's actually a 4-minute clip. I apologise for the loud noise. I didn't know it was going to play quite as loud as that. And unfortunately, it's all the sound is locked away. But watch this object. It's rotating on its own axis. It's a flying earring, as I deem it. It's pulsing anywhere from 2 lights to 4 lights. Watch what happens when it pulses. It kind of morphs its shape. Now, it has been analysed by a physicist, and it was analysed for a documentary called The Journey that you can actually still buy, that was put out by UFO magazine. And basically, towards the end of the clip, you'll see actually that trees come into focus, so we were then able to extrapolate actually height and things like that. And the object's believed to be about 30 feet in diameter, or 9 metres in diameter. But the interesting thing is that it's operating in total silence. You can actually hear the guy recording it talking. He's amazed by these pulses light. You can see it actually turn from front to back. You can see that when it turns, it's almost a disc shape in terms of narrow width. Multiple UFOs. That's one UFO that overtakes another. Now the one that was overtaken, look in relation to the branch, starts to move off and follow the first one. Again, I would argue that that's showing some kind of intelligence. Okay, this is the most common UFO seen, a bright white light. We're now going to another sequence. This is the sequence that was in that musical interlude, and it's a great sequence. It's one of my favourites because people say, well, you know, there's no intelligence behind UFOs. Well, you have an hovering UFO, and he's actually bringing this attention to his wife, and the object, the top one is stationary, and the bottom one's come up underneath, and then it's veering to the right. And I've got the full longer sequence, but this is just a montage. Basically, those 2 objects then start to go out to the right of the frame. So again, a very specific act from my point of view. This is the fleet footage that was also seen in part of that clip. It's not a great copy that I've got with me now, but you can see trees and perspective. What you've got is fleet footage is multiple balls of light, spheres, that are seen increasingly around the world. There's a sequence here. Notice as it zooms in, you will see flickering objects appear from nowhere in the clusters. Look for suddenly objects. There's an object at the top of the screen that's now just going to start speeding up. All the others are staying the same, but that one is manoeuvring and taking up a position. What we now suspect is that these are probably remote objects, for whatever. And there are objects. Now, this is a great clip from Mexico. What we have is fleet sequences. There are 2 types. There are moving fleet sequences of multiple objects, weird and wonderful shapes, and then you have fixed fleet. Fixed fleet means they hold a pattern across the sky. Okay, now you can see that all of these spheres are in position, holding a position, where one larger controlling object, which we believe is this large one, is going around. And you will see that some of the objects move a little bit as if they're taking up a position. You have, and you will see shortly, look out, all these objects, which aren't balloons, they're not tied together, they're all holding their position, apart from 1 or 2 that may move. The vast majority are all holding the pattern. Well, you know, if you release a balloon, they all go up and twirl and all over the place. Nothing can hold patterns in the sky. Even if we have air display teams, we get 8 or 9 aircraft that move as one, tight formation, the Red Arrows in England. Is it the Fighting Falcons in Canada's team? Look at this object. We have cloud for definition. Not one of these objects moves. Look at it. In Guadalajara, Mexico, 2004. There are over 500 spheres holding their pattern across the sky. We have cloud for definition. What can do that? We, man, cannot recreate that. 500 objects. Not a question and answer yet. Okay. All right. So you see how they're all holding formation? What it is, what the message is, who knows? But we cannot replicate 500 objects holding a pattern across the sky. We struggle with 9 aircraft in a formation. 500 objects, but what there is in the middle of this is this. Similar to the other object, it seems to be the bigger, perhaps more controlling object. We cannot recreate 50, never mind 500 objects holding formation. Now this one's a really interesting one because it's more dynamic. Watch how the objects, say the triangle at the top, when they come close to each other, they light up, they move in a strange way. Look at this one, it's moving. All the others are moving in different formations. This one's going a longer journey. Now I think this is the process of when they're getting into formation. But look at the way they interact with each other. And they light, they blink up. Yeah. Okay? But there's some real dynamic. And I think the last little clip, look at this. They almost touch each other and there's like a flash off it. These are not things in our sky that we know about. What they are, not sure, but they certainly aren't man-made. We cannot replicate any of these. Now look at the formation. It's almost in place now. There's very little movement now. I said I'd show you some clips of daylight clips. You don't generally see those. I want to thank the Exopolitik group of Denmark for inviting me here. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you've got an open mind to the subject because there's a lot of material out there if you go look in the right places. UFOs are real. I thank you for your time.